One question that did come up was about the Cistercians. Are they actually allowed to use, like, computers and any other non-verbal, because presumably they're not allowed to speak, but they can write, and can they type?
The Cistercians actually feature in two questions in my book. Their sign language, but also they did something incredible in the Middle Ages, which they devised and used their own mathematical notation. So I'm not an ecclesiastical expert, but what I know about the Cistercians from the research that I've done, the people I spoke to, was they were a reaction to the Benedictines, who wanted to have kind of stricter rules and have a more ascetic lifestyle that was more about just you, the human being, sort of toiling the land and being a kind of rural people. And what that meant was that they, even though that sounds like kind of not progressive, they became brilliant at agriculture and architecture. And they were hugely influential in devising and advancing the science of both agriculture and architecture. And the reason why they didn't want to speak is that they had strict rules about the word of God, etc., and vows of silence. I don't think they can have been that strict all the time, because the Cistercians are also they're the same people who then became the Trappists, who started doing the beer. So and if you go to a Cistercian monastery, there's like huge amounts of things on sale, beer and jams. So they're people who make stuff with their hands, and they're very good at it. And they're not completely backward. They don't say anything, don't do anything.
We did have someone with a little fact check for you in the chat, I'm afraid, Alex.
Yeah, there might be something I'll say.
So basically, I think actually the Navajo have a slightly bigger population than Cherokee these days. I think they're slightly, according to Wikipedia, they're slightly above 300,000, and the Cherokee is slightly below 300,000. But I didn't just bring that up just to make you feel bad.
Okay. It's round about the same. The last time I looked, it could have been that I looked at the actual US figures of how many people they say are in each tribe. But definitely anyway. Navajo is spoken by a lot more people.
Well, no, so that's what I was going to come on to, really. So there was a question about Navajo with, did they have an alphabet that they developed, or was it then transliterated into a Latin script or something like that?
With Navajo?
Yes.
Navajo doesn't have its own script. I mean, I don't think any of the other US Native American languages have their own script, apart from Cherokee. And then by that time, you had people wanting, you had missionaries would arrive and they think, oh, there's no script. We want to translate the Bible. So they'd work out exactly how to do it, and they'd translate the Bible for them. So Navajo would be in Latin script.
And David asks, who I think I recognise the name actually, I think he does some maths things for us. So he said he understood that Navajo was good as a code was because it was very difficult for a non-speaker to write it down, even if they were listening to it on the radio. So even if I, as a non-speaker, were just hearing these sort of weird vowel sounds, I wouldn't be able to even write down anything that's accurate at all. Is that right?
Yeah, it was described as completely impenetrable to outsiders. So not only, you've got lots of things going on. You've got the phonology of it, how it sounds, then you've got the morphology, and then you've got the grammar, and it's all complicated. So, it's belt and braces. But it's true. I mean, what's interesting is that the whole idea of having Native Americans as code talkers originated in the First World War with the Choctaw. The Choctaw is another American indigenous group. And what happened was that it was near the end of the war, but there were two Choctaw US soldiers who were Choctaw, and they were chatting to each other, and a sergeant just walked past and was like, my God, I don't understand a word of it. It doesn't sound like anything. And then he had this idea, and within days, the Choctaw were doing code talking in the German trenches, or in the Allied trenches in the First World War. And it said that the Germans who were hearing it when they were picking up this language, they thought people were speaking underwater. They said that's what they thought, that the language sounded like it was underwater. So I've not studied Esperanto, but for the conlangers and the people who like invented languages, I have a whole chapter. I have 10 questions on invented languages in my book. The things that are different and that seem illogical, but actually Esperanto is very logical, and that's fun. But also, I've got a problem on Dothraki, because Dothraki is very male, and it's for warrior races. And Laden was invented in the 70s as a feminist language, as a way of seeing language from the female point of view. So it was almost a kind of a scientific experiment about if you had a feminist language or female-centered language, whether women would like it and whether they would use it. Fact is, they didn't, which is like a really interesting discussion to have why. And the inventor of it, who was a linguist as well as a novelist, kind of was always sad the fact that her attempt kind of failed, whereas the aggressive male languages carried on. But then the language that actually finished that chapter in is called Toki-Pona, which is a minimalist language which only has 120 words and can be learned in a couple of days, and is really interesting. And it was invented only just over a decade ago by a Canadian linguist, almost as a kind of Zen philosophical idea about if you only have a few words, you've got to make sure you be able to analyze and break down what you're saying to be able to say them in those words. And Toki-Pona, it's nothing like Esperanto, but there's a really big and active Toki-Pona community. It's probably one of the most active conlang, that's constructed languages out there. I've also got, with any of my sort of people who like me for my maths books, there is a mathematical language called transcendental algebra, which was invented about 100 years ago by a linguist who thought that if we wrote sentences using the symbology of maths with equal signs and squared signs and signs, we'd be able to have a scientific language, and you'd be able to settle arguments just by kind of working out the proof. And it's completely bonkers and brilliant. And I would recommend, because you can't go to a bookstore and browse it, just Google transcendental algebra. It's absolutely fantastic, fascinating.
So it's actually a question from Pascal, which actually follows on, where he says, which language do you think is the most logical? Now, I assume you'd probably say something like Esperanto or one of these kind of invented languages. But so I guess there's two parts. Which invented language do you think is the most logical? And then are there, languages that are, more natural, that follow very strict rules and aren't like English, which is basically a mess?
Well, I don't think any language is logical, because languages grow. Yes, I'm not a linguist, but all languages do funny things and have irregularity. I mean, I've learned several languages, and there are always more exceptions than there are non-exceptions to the rules. And often when you're learning it, all the most common words do crazy things. Esperanto is completely logical. Every noun ends in, I think it's an O. Every adjective ends in an A. There are no gender. You know what's a verb. Every stem, and the tenses are amazingly logical. And that, it seems that there are people, it's now 120, 130 years old, and so it's evolving. But from the Esperanto speakers that I spoke to, I think it's maintained its logicalness. I think that people who speak Esperanto kind of believe in what Esperanto was made to do, which is kind of unite the world, not be different, be easy to learn, and like to keep it sort of scientists or philosophers trying to write down. I mean, Leibniz was, I guess, the first person to think about that. And he had this idea of some kind of scientific symbolic language. It's hard to know what he was meaning. Maybe it was a kind of precursor of kind of computer code. But any language that is purely done as pure logic just breaks down and becomes like overly complicated and just doesn't work. There's a brilliant, if you're interested in conlangs and logical languages, read Arica Okrent's In the Land of Invented Languages. It's an absolutely wonderful book, and chapter and verse in there.
Oh, fantastic. So Nora actually asks, how did you manage to learn all of these languages to understand all the puzzles of them? Like obviously, so you've got English, you've got Portuguese. Like how did you kind of expand your library of languages that you knew to even be able to write a book with all these puzzles?
So as I mentioned at the beginning, almost all the puzzles are taken from linguistics Olympiads, and the writers of the puzzles in the linguistics Olympiads are professional academic linguists or native speakers of those languages, or people who study those languages. So yes, it's true. I speak English and Portuguese and French, and I've got like a passable Spanish and German maybe, which probably gives me enough of an understanding of how languages work when I'm look at the puzzle, try and solve it myself. If I can't solve it, look at how it's solved, and then I don't need to learn Esperanto in order to take a great puzzle in Esperanto, realize how to make it, how to adapt it for a general reader. So I didn't learn all these languages. There's 50 odd languages in my book, from Aboriginal languages to Chinese, African languages. There are languages from every continent. I didn't learn them, but I learned enough about how to take a puzzle and make it kind of watertight and entertaining and attractive, and string them together. And in the book, I do credit all the authors and all the native speakers. I mean, this book is kind of checked to bits because I don't speak. How can I? I've got there's a puzzle about Manx. I don't speak Manx. I mean, maybe only 100 people in the world speak Manx, but it's been checked by Manx speakers. Blah 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 blah. So you can get. Don't worry. The puzzles will work and are correct, and don't feel like I'm some amazing, polyglot, speak 1,000 languages that I learned within the last 2 years. I don't.
So Jeremy asks, given that you've been writing this book and putting together loads of puzzles about languages and writing systems and so forth, have you decided to have a look at some of the undeciphered scripts that we've got out there? So there are quite a lot, I think, of bits of tablets and various things that have been found where it has some proto-writing or writing symbols on that we just haven't been able to discover. There's a whole Wikipedia page of them if you're interested. Have you had a look at those, Alex?
I've had to look at them just to look at them, because the beauty of some of these scripts is just kind of amazing to think that the diversity is incredible. And I think the one that I got the impression that seems that people would be most excited, this kind of romantic one, is Rongo Rongo from Easter Island, which is the sort of amazing, actually kind of ornate script. But I've got a whole chapter on decipherment, and I talk about, there are, the decipherments of cuneiform, which is still going on. I mean, most of it is understood. There's the decipherment of Linear B, which is a type of ancient Greek from Crete, Mycenaean Greek. You've got Anatolian or Luwian hieroglyphs. There's lots of really interesting stuff there. I've got a puzzle on Maya hieroglyphs, and Maya hieroglyphs, I think, about 80% deciphered. So I'd actually say that if you're interested in deciphering, the most exciting or active, this is just from what I sensed from talking to the academics and seeing their presence online and the conferences that seem to be going on, like the Maya stuff seems really interesting. And I think it's only been in the last 20 or 30 years that Maya they feel it's properly kind of been cracked. There's also some really interesting stuff going on from the South American indigenous communities with the Incan stuff, with the quipu, which is the system of ropes or strings with knots, which people know was used to register numbers, but now people think that maybe they were also used to register kind of phonetic. We're good at pattern recognition, but computers are a little bit better than we are, and faster.
So they can just churn through every possible combination of letter and symbol, and based on bits that we know, to see if any of it makes any kind of sense. Is that sort of way it would work?
Yeah. So Linear B, which is the great decipherment of sort of the 20th century, really, and which happened in the early 50s. The woman who did a lot of the work on that had something like 200,000 little cards that she wrote down the data points in her Manhattan apartment. That took her 10 years or something to do. Now you could probably just put that in an Excel spreadsheet and do it in everything.
Wow. So some few more great questions come through. Just got time for a few more before we say goodbye. So Bruce asked, what's the variation in the number of characters and sounds in phonetic alphabets? Now, our alphabet has 26 letters, although, some of the letters are kind of make the same sound. Are there phonetic alphabets that have a huge range of sounds, or are there ones that have a very limited range?
So I think it's between like 20 and 40. 20, well, actually sounds. I'm not letters of the English. We have 26 letters in the alphabet. I think we have about 50 phonetic sounds. I'm not sure. Abkhaz, which was a language I didn't know anything about, has 70 consonant sounds and I think 2 vowel sounds. And that is seen as the highest ratio of all languages between consonants and vowel sounds. It has lots of like amazing consonant sounds. A way to find this out, I mentioned that language, the World Atlas of Language Structures, WALS, if you Google that and go onto that, you could choose any language and it will tell you, you know, the phonetics of it, how many consonant sounds, how many vowel sounds.
Joe asks, he's in the process of fine-tuning his own language with the aim of making it as efficient as possible. Could you give him any advice?
Well, I've never tried to invent my own language. I would say I would go look at the Toki Pona website, Facebook group, and ask them, because they are really. I've joined all these like language websites and Facebook groups, and the Toki Pona one seems to be like super active with people discussing exactly that sort of problem. So I would go there. But it depends finally, what you do. You know, the simpler you make it, you probably lose a lot in terms of what you can express. So it depends how expressive you want to be.
It's interesting. Yeah, there's that, because English has like a much larger vocabulary than other European languages. Is that right?
Well, this I think is actually a myth perpetrated by English people. Because when for English speakers, which is, oh yes, we've got words coming from French and Germanic words and the ancient Greek. When I try to find this out, firstly, do you count words that are in use or not in use? And then for size of dictionary, if you go in and look, you know, the OED is absolutely massive dictionary. And I thought, well, that's obviously the biggest dictionary in the world. There's actually a Wikipedia page on biggest dictionaries, and I don't think it even makes the top 10.
Yeah.
I think there's a Korean dictionary which has like even more. So I would say that the human brain probably only has a certain amount, maximum amount that it can learn, and everything around that is just variation in who's actually bothered to write it down.
And who's invented like
publishing industry.
And who's got obscure technical terms that can kind of max out your dictionary with, you know, exactly. Different names for.
What's 2 different words?
Whilst we mull on what that means, I think we'll probably just finish with this interesting question from Nicholas, where he talks about what can we do about languages that are in danger of extinction and other languages, you know, that are undergoing erosion as well. Now, on the one hand, I'm conflicted by this question because I speak English and I love the fact that English doesn't have an Académie Française or anything. We can just say whatever words we want and it changes and evolves and it's brilliant. But then I also feel like these smaller languages, you know, especially in a place like Papua New Guinea that has just a huge amount of like linguistic diversity, I also feel like we should be saving that and we should be preserving it. So I feel conflicted, I guess. I mean, how do you feel about sort of very small languages?
To continue, you need children to learn it. So if children don't learn it, so you need to encourage the communities that are shrinking for them to teach their children it. So you need to make it easier for their children to learn it. And I think it certainly in some of the American indigenous languages, there's quite a lot of NGO work in, you know, because it's all connected to kind of political rights and identity. I think there's quite a lot of work that goes on to try and make these communities value what they have and let the elders go into schools and let the kids to try and feel proud about it. So there's a lot of, you need more than just linguists saying, this is interesting, we need to study. I think it becomes a kind of a cultural and a political thing. But like the internet, for example, can like be a huge help because it brings speakers together. And Esperanto, for example, spoken, say, the native speakers of Esperanto are like 1,000 people. So it must be, if you were to list the languages by native speakers in the world, Esperanto must be, you know, 1,000th or something. Esperanto is something like the 30th or so most prominent language on the internet. Or, in other words, it punches so much higher than its weight because people really love that language. It means more than just speaking it. They want to talk to people about, they want to communicate with each other. So I think the internet also brings different speakers and as a way of kind of continuing it. So that also helps.
Wow, fantastic. Well, that just about brings things to a close. Before we go, Alex, I just had a quick quiz for you. The Cistercians said that England was the drink tea place.
Yes.
But actually, Britain is actually third in tea consumption per capita. Do you know which countries are first and second?
Is this Indian tea or is mate tea from South America? Does that count?
Apparently, it's all tea.
It's all tea. So maybe Argentina?
No, actually, number one, and by quite some distance, to be honest, is Turkey, who drink 5.8 kilos of tea per person. And second is Ireland, which only drinks 2.2 kilos per person. So there you go. And then UK is third with 1.9 kilos per person per year.
That's a brilliant pub quiz question. When the pubs are open again.
Anyway, thank you so much, Alex. It's been wonderful spending the evening with you. Sorry for everyone that's been having any connection issues, but do remember you can watch the replay using the link that you got. Just to wrap things up, don't forget the Royal Institution membership is open to everyone, so do please sign up if you want to support us and keep us going for another 221 years. Please also do drop us a donation if you've enjoyed the talk. Don't forget the book. Here it is.
Oh yeah.
I've got my own copy.
Gift.
It's perfect Christmas gift. Available at all good bookshops now. Don't forget, we've got 2 talks coming up next week. On Tuesday, we'll be talking about nerve agents, most deadly poisons that we've ever created. And then we'll be talking about astronomy and astronomers on Thursday with Joe Marchant. So, as always, we like to keep it varied here. Alex, is there anything else you'd like to say, or where can people find you if they want to get more information?
Every Monday, 2 weeks on a Monday, I have a puzzle column in The Guardian. So that's Alex Bellos' Monday Puzzle. You can see me there. My website is alexbellos.com. You can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at Alex Bellos. I'm very, very easy to get in touch with. Very happy to respond to people asking me questions about either of my books. And also there's footballschool.co. So that's the book series for 8 to 12-year-olds that explains the world through football. But yeah, I'm on social media. I'm easy to get in touch with if people want to.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alex. I've really enjoyed the evening. And,
it's been really fun.
Yeah, we'll hope to see you actually in the Royal Institution again very soon. Anyway, take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.